Welcome to those of you who have turned up online, and welcome to those who turned up in person. I have ideas about what I'd like to present. What I'd like to present is an overarching notion of the path of practice, and then present some description of what we did in the first semester, and then what we would do in the second semester, and maybe even leading into the third, but not so much. And then I would like to answer any questions you have about, and actually, you can interrupt me at any point. Even if you want to say, I don't know what you're talking about, that's okay. I take that in a positive way, a challenge to articulate it in a new way. Is that okay? And I think we're going to go to 4, even though it says 4:30, and maybe we can even. I think at one point I will describe it. I will answer your questions, and then we will either do some practice together, or say, well, at a future date we'll all sign up and then do it. Or we can just add a little bit in, or a lot. So about 20 years ago, I was at Tassajara, our formal monastery, and I was thinking, this setup, the Tassajara setup, I was there for the 3 months in the winter, 3-month practice period, and I thought, this is an ideal setting for practice. And then I was also thinking, but it's a rare few who actually have the time, the opportunity, and whatever else it takes to come here. And then I asked myself, what would it be like to take the essence of a Tassajara practice period and bring it into everyday life? And of course, Tassajara is surrounded by 130,000 acres of wilderness. So unless you have a big yard, I don't think you'll be able to, mimic that. But that being said, there is a way that practice enables us to meet our life and learn from the experiences we're having, both positive and negative. And as we learn, we're learning both how to live a human life, we're learning how to harmonize with the human life, and harmonize with the conditions of the world, and hopefully harmonize with the people within the world. And so I'd like to describe briefly the first semester is about initiating. Given the Zen way, even if you've heard Zazen instruction 100 times, listen to it again. Because with a certain openness, you can learn some more.
Sorry.
Hi. You're welcome. Well.
Oh, thank you.
So initiate, and then sometimes in a very formulaic way, set up in an environment conducive with practice. Like if you're a beginning sitter, we would ask you to just think, well, where would I sit? Would I come to the Zen center? And most people can't come in the morning. Well, they could, but it would make a very long day. Where will I sit? When will I sit? What kind of initiation process in terms of my sitting, will I have? Will I do 108 prostrations, or will I just sit on? Will I offer incense to Ganesh, or will I bow to the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha? And is there someone I should tell? Oh, I should let my partner know that I'm going to sit in the corner and for a half hour and do nothing. So not to be alarmed. And is there some way my schedule has to adjust to open up the sitting time? And I know some of you have been through that. And then, so establishing that, and mostly it's experiential learning. So you just learn by doing, and the more you repeat it experientially, the more it sinks in. And then it becomes kind of normalized. If you get up every day for 100 days, that'll be who you are. If you get up 3 times in 100 days, each one will be kind of unusual. This is not what I usually do. And then when we establish something about sitting, and we're learning experientially what awareness is, and then we start to try to interject into our daily activities moments of awareness. And then over time, the moments of awareness, rather than feel like something abnormal or something interrupting me being me, they start to become inclusive in inviting all the strands of me being me into awareness. And as we do that, there's a growing capacity for intentionality. Yeah. Usually, who we are and how we're behaving is sort of run by our is sort of run by our emotions, our habit energies, the context of the situation. And each of them has, each of those facets of our being has its own kind of world, you know. Like when we're feeling generous, something in us, it influences us. When we're feeling annoyed and angry, something in us influences us. Yeah. And then there's a way in which, when we're starting to establish awareness as part of who we are, we start to cultivate the capacity to notice, oh, and we have both the intention and the capacity to add deliberate states of consciousness. You know? And so in the 8-week course, we spend about the first 4 weeks introducing awareness, extending awareness into other parts of our life. And then after about 4 weeks, of course we're never done in our whole lifetime. Not unless you're very dedicated and you go on and become a Buddha and completely enlightened, and then I think it's free, it just moves along by itself. And each day is a good day, as Yunmen said. Then we can introduce, after about a month or a certain familiarity, we can introduce ideas like the 4 Brahma Viharas. You know, compassion for ourselves and for others. Then a well-wishing. Then a sympathetic joy. And finally, an equanimity. So, can we intentionally get to the place where we can introduce those qualities intentionally? And so, each week, I write some suggested practices. And they fall into 2 categories. Do it, and also reflect on what happens when you do it. And then in the last couple of weeks of the first semester, we looked at, well, what kind of hindrances come up when you do it. And unless you've become fully enlightened, you're quite likely to run into all of them, you know. Desire, aversion, lethargy, low energy, anxiety, restlessness, and worry. And then the final one is doubt. And But one of the underlying themes is that as you do it, you're starting to work with those hindrances. Actually, the word in Pali means more like coverings. They cover up. It's like maybe we've all experienced moments when we're caught up in some behavior, and it feels almost like a mystery. And why am I acting out like this? You know, we're covering up our motivations, our distress, our pain. And also by introducing healthy and happy states of mind, you know, even when we're compassionate, there's a certain kind of appeal to being compassionate. I mean, there's also an appeal to being hostile, but that one usually draws us into a kind of bitter world, you know. It's almost like we're saying, well, I have to be hostile to get on with my life, you know. It doesn't make us happy. When we show compassion for someone else, what's going on for this person that they're standing on the street corner weeping, you know, or whatever. Something in us, as we develop the 4 Brahma Viharas, something in us starts to discover a gentler demeanor towards our humanness. And then we can turn towards the hindrances and start to relate to them in a different way. You know, usually our psychological makeup, it creates defenses so that we can limit our suffering. But those defenses, denial, suppression, compartmentalization, they don't really serve us, you know. Our life becomes more mysterious. It's like, and why am I annoyed when I see someone walk across the street? So we start to soften up and loosen up the behaviors, the attitudes, the emotions of our being, and then it helps us in 2 very significant ways. It helps us through loosening up, through being available for feedback, whether it's what we create internally or how we experience others in the world. And then also, it helps us develop a certain kind of, the 4 Brahma Viharas, helps us to create a certain kind of, within us, a certain kind of agency. it's a little bit like discovering, well, I can look at my desires and aversions without being discouraged. I can start to look at them in a positive way. Oh, there's a teaching here. Someone said to me once, we were standing on the front steps, and he said, if I won $1 million in the lottery, I would buy a certain kind of car. And I was stunned. You know, I grew up in an environment where we didn't even have cars. And I thought, well, I want something, but it's certainly not a big shiny car. That wanting within us, you know, can we start to learn from it, you know? Can we be this sort of person that looks at who they are and so about the 6th or 7th class, I made a list of 6 ways of personal inquiry. One was psychological. And I find that this, like, just asking myself, how does that serve me psychologically? You know, if I'm getting mad at someone on a psychological way, what's going on? And you know, early Buddhism has lots of methodologies to exploring the self. But I think in the last 100 years we've introduced what we call, you know, taking the old Greek word, psyche, you know, now we've turned it into a way to navigate aspect of our being that we call psychological. How does it serve me psychological? Second one, I'm going to go through these quite quickly. Subjective intimacy and self-exploration. You know, the demeanor of, I'm in the process of learning who I am and how I am and what makes me tick, what makes me happy, what makes me disappointed. Yeah. And then reflective practice. Either on the fly, like, oh, why is it, what's going on that disposition arises? Or we can reflect on it, you know. You know, we can sit down and take a moment and reflect on where's the happiness? Where's the sources of happiness in my life? Just anything, you know? Each week I'll suggest reflections. I'll suggest activities, practices, and then reflections. And then cultivating mindfulness and compassion. And seeing how that is. You know, my experience is that each of us is complex. You know, you think, oh, okay, well, I will be compassionate. And then at times you are, and then at times you're not, you know? Or maybe you even think, this is a kind of burden, you know, being compassionate. Or maybe you also at another time think, how lovely, you know? Like, we are a multitude, in our complexity, we are a multitude of responses. Yeah. And as we can start to allow for that, and then classically in Buddhism, you start with the positives. Because our mind is inclined, because it's painful, to start with the negatives. You know? So it's a good training for us to start with the positives. And then we can take up the hindrances, and then classically, can we forgive ourselves for having hindrances? And it's an intimate process, because in this process of bringing in awareness into our being, we tend to not hide out so much in our psychological defenses. We tend to start admitting to ourselves who we are and how we are. And the practice of forgiveness. And then pretty soon you discover that it's not just yourself you're forgiving, it's other people too. You know? Or maybe it's the other way around. You forgive other people and then you think, well, maybe I should give myself a break too. And then the last one is inviting in the positive. Like a deeper sense, like in the Mahayana Buddhism, and practicing not simply for yourself, but for all beings. And so in the first semester, well, maybe I'll pause there and see if anyone has a question.
I know this is going to seem overly rigid, but it helps me remember the 6 items you just went through. How did you categorize those again? You said something before you introduced them as a category, and I don't remember what that was.
I was saying these are 6 strategies with which you can start to explore the self. Actually, I was giving a talk at Tassajara, and I was rummaging around in my mind, well, what should I talk about? And then that's what came out of me, these 6 categories. But someone had not only a recording going, he had AI going too. And he produced for my assistant, and he produced for me an AI summary of what I just talked about.
So that was AI's summary, not yours. Is that right, what you just said?
Well, actually, then I went through it and sort of fashioned it to my own taste.
Yeah, it's impressive sometimes. At times, AI is very impressive.
Yeah. And then sometimes, like ourselves, it's utterly wrong. And then sometimes it's impressively accurate, like ourselves.
Does Buddhism believe in a God? So
You know, it's interesting. Does Buddhism believe there's a very gently man up behind the clouds in a white robe, watching down and planning all of our lives? No, it doesn't. But is there a life force within us
Yes.
that keeps this incredible being that we're all part of, that the whole universe is part of?
I learned recently that people believe that God is your consciousness in your head, and you can create what you want. You do certain things like visualize what you want.
You know, I just realized the people online can't hear. Did you hear any of that? No. And the question was, what's God? And then the person who was mentioning it was saying, well, there's people who believe that God is your consciousness. Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Any other?
There's a question online from John. John can go ahead and unmute and ask the question.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. This is before you got to the 6 elements. You said something about a kind of a journaling practice. In the journaling practice, it was something like, this is something I'm going to do, and then this is a reflection on what happened when I did that. So my question is,
Let me just correct what I said, John. I said that each week I make a suggested practice, and it has 2 categories. In one category is doing, and then the other category is reflecting on it. So please continue with your question.
My question is to try to relate this to the 4 nutriments that are usually elaborated by Thich Nhat Hanh. And the 3rd nutriment, volition, so he says there's food, there's sense impressions, and then there's volition, like developing my desires in a wholesome way. I think that's what he means when he says I'm trying to cultivate and digest my volitions themselves. That volition itself is a nutriment. So I'm wondering if that ties in with a sense of trying to cultivate healthy desires. So, I notice when I do less time playing PlayStation and more time doing a particular mindfulness practice, for example, I'm changing my sense of myself that I feel good about or what I think is feeding me.
I mentioned it when I was given that summary, I mentioned agency. That as we start to make more sense to ourselves, about ourselves, and start to see the workings of who we are, and then it it gives us a certain kind of agency. You know, it's like when we're trying to tell ourselves, well, I'm perfect, my life's perfect, and everything I do is perfect. It's a difficult thing to keep persuading ourselves and keep finding within ourselves that perfection. Whereas if we have a notion, well, I'm all sorts of things in all sorts of ways. In fact, it's amazingly varied. Then we can enter that with a certain kind of volition or a certain kind of agency, because we're not bound by some limited notion of who we are. And very much in the Zen school, you know, where we say, don't know mind, you know, like, how are you going to respond to this? Well, you don't have to know in advance, just do it and see. So this process of creating volition or agency, as I was calling it. Thank you, John. Damon, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Rabbit. Yeah, I mean, in the 80s, when I first read Beginner's Mind, you know, I was very taken with the practice because the expectations were very low. It was said, sit with no gaining idea. And I feel like already in a half an hour, I've got all these goals I've got to achieve in this practice path. I'm feeling very intimidated. I don't feel like it's consistent with no gaining idea.
And was there a question in there that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, how can I be less intimidated by, like, okay, I want to get good at the Brahma Viharas and getting rid of my hindrances. How can I just sort of relax and, like, say, you know what, those things may happen, but if they're not, then that's okay too. I don't fail the course.
Yeah, and in fact, that relaxing, you know, and when I was teaching this semester, I reviewed my notes this morning, and there was one place where I likened the practice to learning how to swim. You know, when you get in the water and you're thrashing around in some kind of desperate way, you just sink. When something in you relaxes, somehow the buoyancy of having a body, it becomes an ally rather than an enemy. And I do think that just relaxing does help us in that way as we're discovering how to be mindful and how to be present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So that was the first semester. And that was the whole course, too. And then in the second semester, we deepen. You know, as I was saying, you know, it's an experiential learning, so we learn through repetition. But it's hopefully, as we continue, we keep seeing who we are, and we keep being able to experience it. And as we continue with those kinds of practices, something, our eye of practice, I discovered that in a Dogen fascicle, that term, the eye of practice. Actually, what he said is, what we see is what our eye of practice can see at that time. And when we're caught up in the hindrances, they cover up. And when our mind is settled and attentive, then we see a lot more. Okay. And so the second semester, we go deeper, and then I will introduce some more teachings. What I find helpful is that that often the early teachings are described as in a way as you know they were formulated as the practices of renunciates who were either monks or nuns and who were living in a monastic setting. But the teachings there, they are valuable as a way to engage, but they need interpretation in our current environments. And to follow that one step more, I would say that each of us has the challenge of discovering appropriate practice for the conditions in which we find ourselves. And part of those conditions are internal, and part of them are external. But with a certain kind of agency, we can ask ourselves, what's a skillful way to relate to this? And it's a very different kind of question from the one we would ask when we're feeling overwhelmed and discouraged, you know. When we're overwhelmed and discouraged, our environment, internally and externally, has become a burden. And so this exploration of how to approach the human condition and how to contact it deeply, and in the process learn deeply how to be human. That's the second semester. And then the third one is carry it into the world. So so what we could do now is you could ask more questions, or we could sit for a while, or if there's anything more that you would like me to talk about, I'd be happy to try to do that. Do you have more questions? Shall we sit for a while? Or is there something else you would like me to talk about?
I have a question. How much in the second semester do you think we'll be talking about hindrances, in particular doubt, and helping us to work does not.
It's interesting you would bring up doubt, because
That's the big one for me.
one of the first things I was going to, there's a teaching in early Buddhism that I was going to use as a starting off point, and it's the 5 attributes of the spiritual path, and the first one is trust. You know, so in a way, doubt and trust are there's a kind of a binary there, you know, like I've been talking about agency. Well, agency is a trust in our own capacity, you know. Like, when we doubt ourselves, well, then we need all sorts of structure or conditions under which we're going to feel safe, you know. And when we trust ourselves, it's like, okay, I'll get in there and something will happen. And I will respond.
So it doesn't necessarily need to be done explicitly in the course, because it will happen through the development of agency and all the things we do to facilitate that, of course.
Often what happens for us is there's a certain aspect of being that we find problematic. And then we're doing the practice, and we're learning something about agency. And part of the agency is in the service of opening up and admitting our doubt. Yeah. So this wonderful complexity of the human condition. Or maybe it's this terrible aspect of the human condition. Maybe on a good day, it's this wonderful aspect, and on a bad day, it's this terrible one. You know, doubt, procrastination, they, in a certain disposition, they can have a certain appeal. You know, like, how do I know I'm going to be able to handle what comes up? Yeah, it's a good question. But when you allow yourself, well, I could be all sorts of responses. I could be speechless. I could be offended. I could be ingeniously creative. I could be courageously engaging. Yeah. And so this kind of teaching, the teaching of gathering awareness, is, yeah. And you probably are some version of all of those.
That's really interesting to me, because part of my thing is the doubt, you know, it takes a particular form in me that lives within me, actually prompts me to come up with all the possible reactions and almost, you know, I mean, that's what I do, right? It's just interesting, but I know that's not what you're talking about.
Yes.
So again, it's complicated.
It's complicated. And then, will I be able to manage those complications? And if we say to ourselves, I have to be completely in control. Well, then it's a very dangerous proposition, because we're not completely in control of the world. We're just actually a participant in this amazing collaboration.
So, as I mentioned, I missed out on part one, the first trimester. So, how would you recommend proceeding, or would you recommend proceeding? I know the videos are available online. They've been made available
Yes.
for us as part one. So, one option is to kind of do a crash course until October 7th.
Or in addition to that, or rather than watch, I mean, each of those videos is a full hour. But I wrote up summaries, and they would, and suggested practices. I would encourage you to look at the summary, look at the suggested practices. And the nice thing about coming at it after it's been completed is you can see the arc of it, or as I was trying to describe, you know, first you just handle the basics, then you try to cultivate a compassionate disposition for it, and then you acknowledge there's some resistance. And you could try on for a week, or you could look through the reflections and think, that one doesn't appeal to me so much, but I'd like to start with that one, you know? Yeah. But they're all there, and you can access them whenever you wish. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Anyone online? So let's do this.
It looks like Sophia does have a question online.
Oh, I missed that.
Sorry.
Oh, there you are, Sophia. I was looking for a little golden hand.
I know.
But yeah, go ahead.
Just a question. EPP, course number 1, EPP course number 2, which ends right at the end of this year. Will EPP 3 be in 2026? And do you have any sort of idea of dates or timeline for the third course?
You know, I have to confess, I don't. But, you know, it will follow on, this number 3 will follow on from number 2, and probably if that leaves us close to the holiday period, we'll wait until the other end of the holiday period.
Okay. Thank you. But it's going to happen, right?
It's going to happen.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome. Malik, did you have a question? Please go ahead. I think you just muted yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Having a little trouble with my display, whether I'm on mute or not. I had a question. You've mentioned some terms from psychology, like defense mechanisms, and you mentioned that we can use some of the tools from psychology to sort of bolster or translate some things from the Pali text. I was just wondering, in the context of this course, what's the difference between psychology and Dharma?
you know, the core meaning of Dharma is the truth of practice and the teachings that arise from that. And I would say psychology is, you know, I think of going back to Freud and his early explorations around the human mental, emotional condition. And his formulations of that condition and the hindrances it brings up and how to treat it. And I think that's become our version of Abhidhamma, that arose in early Buddhism. So they have quite different roots, and in some ways they have quite different approaches. Maybe another way to answer that would be that the Dharma is expounded in the service of liberation and awakening. And that would be held in contrast in the psychological world. We're looking at how to handle the complexities of human consciousness. And maybe it's even smaller than that. Maybe it's more detailed than that. The mental, emotional complexity of our being. And I think awakening and liberation are going beyond any notions of mastering or succeeding. That may be entailed in the psychological perspective. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
So what we'll do is you can stand up, we'll take a short bathroom break, and then we'll do a guided meditation and then see whatever you would like to do after that. But we'll start with some simple stretches, and then at a certain point I'll say, oh, okay, now go down and sit on your cushion. You know, I've done yoga for many years, and it has convinced me that since most of us don't get enough exercise, that we should build into our lives some kind of way of stretching and opening and our bodies. And if you can just start by bouncing up and down on the balls of your feet. Okay, and if you can pause, plant your feet. And then I would suggest you do these as strenuous as is appropriate for your body. And then you put your feet a little further apart. And then change direction. And then bring your feet back together. Actually, bring them the whole way together. And bend at the knees. And then make a circle with your knees. And again, do it in a way that works for your body. And then reverse direction. And then come up. Then bring your arms up. Stretch up as high as you can. Bring your arms back. And then let them come down. It's like the arms and the shoulders come up. And then the hands and the arms and the shoulders go back. And down. So as you do these, you kind of relax into them. Okay, and then the reverse, bring your hands back, bring them up, stretch up, and then stretch forward, opening up between your shoulder blades. And then pause. And bring both arms up. Stretch up. And then as you bend to the right, stretch up with your left arm. So you can feel the stretch the whole way down. And then to the other side, stretch out with the right arm. And just move back and forth. And then let your arms come down. And then bring your awareness down to your feet. Balance your weight on both feet. Let your body open up. Open up between your groin and your throat. Widen the shoulders. But in an easeful way rather than a forcing way. Unlock your knees. Put your left hand on your abdomen, below your navel. Your right hand in the middle of your chest. And then just put enough pressure on your body with your hands that you can feel your hands. And then imagine how your body breathes when you're deeply asleep. Can you let something go so that the breath sort of deepens and fills the lungs, and the diaphragm moves, and the abdomen moves. The mind trusts the body to breathe by getting out of the way, letting it happen. And as you let the breath happen, in the same way, let the sound of the fountain happen. And can you have the eyes half open so that the sight can happen? And can you let that just happening, can you bring it to the cushion? Can you let your hands come down to your side and then slowly walk back to your seat? So we're going to sit for about 20 minutes. And as you take your seat and arrange your body in the posture, can that activity of letting it happen, can you let your body happen? Whatever physical sensations arise. Can you open up the front of your body? Can you let it happen? Can you widen your shoulders? Not something you're obliging and forcing your body to do, but a kind of invitation to have an opening, a release. can you attend to your body and have it neither leaning back or leaning forward, but just balanced in an upright position. And then can you lay, if you haven't done so, lay the fingers of the left hand over the right hand. The thumb tips lightly touching. And your thumb tips around your navel at that level. Not necessarily resting on your lap. So, the guidelines of finding your posture, can they be an invitation, a discovery of what it is to embody being? And then just exploring, what is it to let your face happen? What is it to let the breath happen? Nothing in particular needs to happen. Nothing in particular needs to stop happening. Can the inhale be allowed to happen? The pause and the exhale allowed to happen. trusting the body knows how to breathe. Can the sounds just happen? Can even the thoughts just happen? And if your being gets caught up in thinking, just breathe the thinking in and breathe the thinking out. Letting the thinking be a chorus to just letting the breath happen. So a lot of what I was talking about in that guided meditation was the effort of zazen, you know. Or maybe it would be better to say the non-effort of zazen. But it's like, can you sit upright without it being a demand on your being? Can you let the breath flow? You know, there's a lot to be learned about effort from letting the inhale happen and letting the exhale happen, and discovering that there's 4 phases to the breath. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. Yeah. The breath is very susceptible to our state of mind, to our emotions, to our disposition. Can, rather than be a mental creature, can we be a physical creature? And that the activity of mind is just something that happens to this physical creature. And can that letting it happen be inclusive rather than exclusive? Can the splashing of the fountain just happen? Can the tatami just happen? So, so Zazen is the enactment of awakening. It's not a strategy by which we accomplish something, by which we attain something. It's more an enactment of something we were born being able to do, to be present. And interestingly, as we learn to breathe, when we come out of the womb and as we learn to breathe, we do that deep breath. Or that deep breath does our body and does our mind. And to let the being of Zazen perfume your life, and guide you as you engage some aspect of your being, some aspect of your activities, how you meet and greet others, how you make your decisions as to how to live. Can there be, in all of those activities, can there be a sense of relaxing into it, immersing in it? And of course, the sensibilities of this way of talking, what it's promoting, is not something we figure out. Yeah. Your mind could figure out, have its ideas about figuring out how the tatami feels. But actually, feeling the tatami is the direct experiencing of tatami. So if that brings up any questions for you as to what you would like to include in this course, or any understandings you have about it, or ambitions. Ilona, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Hello. Well, it's not exactly related to what you were just talking about, but as you were speaking about, I remember something that I've been wanting to ask. I've been going to the Zen Center, I started going a few years ago, and then I stopped practicing because of some trauma and things like that. And then I started going and practicing again with the establishing Path Practice 1. And then things came up again related to trauma. And I think it's when you clear your mind, you can actually start processing things, which it is, I understand, it's the path to healing. So it's a good thing, but then it made it very difficult for me to at some point, because I always liked meditating, but then I started having difficulty just sitting down, and I think that's a hindrance for me, and a big obstacle to continue practicing. And then I saw well, it's a meme, I guess, online, but it's, those things are taken from quotes, I guess, from maybe therapists or spiritual teachers, and says when your nervous system is wired for urgency, arrest can feel like a risk, stillness can stir anxiety, silence can sound like danger, slowing down might hurt at first, but it's actually how you heal. So this is my main issue with practice. This really kind of explains my difficulty with sitting. So is there anything, I know the answer I can come up with and probably heard you talk about or something, you have to sit through those feelings. So is there anything you can suggest, or, anything you can say about that?
Do you know the teachings of David Treleaven? Have you heard of that person?
No.
He wrote a wonderful book called Mindfulness for Trauma. That's not the title he gave it. I think the title he gave it was Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness.
Uh-huh.
But what he's talking about, he said in his book, one of the examples he offers is when you ask someone who's traumatized to just lie down on the ground and relax, that may be an anxiety-inducing experience.
Yeah.
So I would say to you, approach with care, because letting the body breathe may or may not be comforting. and it may not be an opening to a restful and reassuring way to be. The challenge is to build the trust and the agency, you know, the way you trust yourself to take on what you're experiencing, you know. To be careful, to be gentle, to meet it in a way that's healthy for you. You know? And to discover what that way is, because someone like me may say something like, let your body breathe, and think, that's a soothing comment. But for you, it may not be. It may feel like a very dangerous notion. You know? So the process of discovery for you is quite likely to be influenced by your trauma. Physically, even the hormones flowing through your body, you know, it may have a pronounced effect.
Yeah.
But to find the practices that work for you. And to be patient and gentle with yourself. And I would encourage, it's quite a straightforward book, the book David Treleaven wrote. If you just add in his name, David Treleaven, trauma, you'll find the book.
Yeah, I see it here. It's it was put in the chat. There's a link, so thank you.
No. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was like the reason I don't know if you noticed that I stopped coming to the part one. But what I have been continuing doing, and instead of like actually sitting, that's been more easier for me. And when you say hormones, I know I have like I know I have like cortisol. Like I started getting like hives and itching, like all these things that I looked up. It's like, I think it's high cortisol. But I think the type of praxis, which is helpful, and maybe you will, you know, we would look into that in more detail in part two. If you can talk about that, it's more like just being mindful instead of like sitting practice. Which it helps, because I think sometimes you sit and then as soon as you're done sitting and meditating, you get up and like your mind is just all over the place again. But I've been trying to, when I stopped sitting, been trying to just practice mindfulness, just being very present and like in the moment while just doing things, regular things, like feeling my body, just all those things that you do when you're sitting, but like in everyday activity. So, you know, getting better at that and learning maybe some techniques and things like that. Maybe that's what we'll do in part two. I think that's the main thing I've been kind of focusing on. And I still try to sit here and there. Sometimes it's like difficult and I just get up. It's like I sit and try to relax and there's like this surge of almost like energy. Like I'm supposed to run and like I just can't sit still. But I still try to practice like mindfulness throughout the day and kind of remember to like check in, where is my mind, like, yeah.
Yeah. It might be helpful to explore mindful movement. You know, like as I segued from mindful movement into sitting practice. You know, it just that way of keeping the body moving, keeping the body opening, might be helpful. And I think that's part of the challenge, is to discover what's helpful and what's not, and to trust yourself with your own response.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions here, or?
I joined late. I was actually sitting over there waiting for you guys to move over because Kevin this morning said it would start here and then move there.
He did?
So maybe it was a misunderstanding, but at any rate, I'm really glad that I joined when I did during meditation, and I found the guidance very helpful. I'm sure you've never heard of this, and I'm a practitioner before, but I have a very self-critical mind. And so, so at any rate, what I find myself doing is constantly evaluating my meditation and saying I'm not a very good meditator. So I have that, and then various instructions to just accept what is. And then an old, I think it's a Pali story of the Buddha who went into an establishment that had a number of women, and he wanted her to take a shower. Took his robe off, hung it up. And as he was in the shower, one of the women put the robe on, and she was dancing around. Oh, like the Buddha. And the people with the Buddha were horrified. And when the Buddha came out, he said, no. What she did is incredibly profound. And that has really helped, her evolution enormously. Just putting the robe on and making a joke of it. And so when I'm being critical, I think of that story and I try to say, I put the robe on, I sit, I've got sashimi, And I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions around that.
The first comment I'd like to make is there are different little stories, not quite the same as that, but similar in about the effects of putting on the robe. And the intrigue that comes up for me in relationship to that is, how does that play out? I think when we put on a certain mental disposition, when we put on a certain situation, like even sitting in meditation pose is a kind of clothing or influential disposition, and that story says to me, I hadn't heard that version of that story. Says to me that when we're open, we can be positively influenced by lots of things. And that's what I was trying to bring into the meditation, you know. We can think of the sound of the fountain as a nuisance. Well, it's disturbing me. It's disturbing my quiet. Or we can think of it as a kind of positive contribution to presence. Yeah. And to me, that would be the core of these stories. What contributes to presence? Suzuki Roshi, I've been told, is that one of his favorite movies was this soldier is trying to escape from Burma. There was a war on, in Burmese war. And so he dresses up as a monk. And then he has to go across Burma, walk across Burma to escape from the war. And when people see him in a robe and think he is a monk, then there's all this veneration offered to him. And he has many experiences, but by the time he has reached the other side of Burma, he is a monk.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So.
He played the role so long that it became it.
But other people responded in a way that opened him up to embracing it.
So I guess that's happening to all of us.
Yeah. Any other questions about how? So, you know, you unfortunately, there's lots of language that says he, being the masculine pronoun, sits down and attains this something that makes him special. And how we translate the early canon, you know, the early teachings of Buddha, we can find that in there, in the English translations. But more it's, as Dogen said, forgetting the self. Like, to forget the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Like, get into the details of how your body feels, how your mind is behaving, how the interplay of self and other, and you know, and just forget that you should be accomplishing something or attaining something or competing with someone else. Can this kind of trying to build up some kind of edifice of self, can that just be quietly set aside? And can something else come forth? And to sit with that kind of disposition. Deirdre, did you have a question? Or comment?
Hi, I'm I'm so happy to see you and thank you for this. I'm just going to lower my hand. I have a sort of half formulated, it's not really a question. I'm not sure what it is. It's kind of a question. I keep on thinking I know the answers. I keep looking everything up and I have this kind of recurrent glimmer of this image from a prayer I do every morning as part of an homage, a devotional practice. And it involves asking Tara to protect me from the 8 great dangers, including they're embodied in various metaphors: elephants of ignorance, lions of pride, snakes, serpents of jealousy, and then fires of anger, floods of craving, false imprisonment of avarice, thieves of false views. And then the last one is the one I keep coming back to: flesh-eating ghouls of doubt. Flesh-eating ghouls of doubt. And in this morning prayer, which is part of a 12-step program that I do, asking for help, so as not to assume that I have, power over everything, which I know I don't. I think of it as fear, but when I was looking at the relationship between doubt and fear, they're both hindrances, yes, and that's according to Google, same AI, but I'm wondering what you would say about the relationship between doubt and fear. And just to put this in concrete terms, I'm going to a family gathering next weekend in Santa Barbara. I'm living in Toronto, as you know, and I'm feeling a lot of apprehension just because politically they're very different. Some of them are very different from me, and I don't know. I don't feel safe. Let's just put it that way. So that brings up some fear. But I know I'm safe because I do have faith and I have my practice. And I can come back to it over and over again. What would you say is the relationship between, as you can tell, this isn't really a formulated question. I'm just wondering if you have any of your thoughts on this.
As you were going through those, the dangers that we're capable of as humans, envy, pride, of course, we are capable of them. But to overdo the kind of that approach to liberation, we can overdo it, and then it brings up a kind of fear. Whereas if we cultivate compassion, if we cultivate forgiveness, if we cultivate patience, then internally and in the world, we can start to feel safer.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, family gatherings can be evocative for us. Who knows who's going to bring up some old grudge? But families are an amazing event. They can be rife with old grudges and hurts, but they're all held together with a certain kind of loving connection. As I was saying earlier, we're complex creatures. All of those are in there. And I think it's a skillful strategy to cultivate the forgiveness, the compassion, the love, in contrast to pointing out the shortcomings, whether we're pointing out our own shortcomings, so-called shortcomings, or somebody else's shortcomings.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah. Makes sense.
and I would encourage you to think each person is bringing themselves, and sometimes experiencing ourselves is a painful thing, you know. Can we find ways to nourish ourselves? Yeah. That's part of the path too. You know, sometimes we beat up on ourselves and then compensate by some kind of self-indulgence. And you know, they both have their own burden that they place on us. But usually we have to feel our way into the positive.
Hmm.
We can't demand it of ourselves. It has to be sort of coaxed along. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions online or in person? Yeah. I would offer you this in closing. I would offer you this kind of inquiry. What have you heard in the last couple of hours that would be worth remembering? And could you just take a moment in a shorthand way and acknowledge it? And of course, maybe there's something worth forgetting. Well, that too. Maybe at some point you think, oh, I have to be perfect. Well, I would say that's worth forgetting. Or this is a competition. I would say that's worth forgetting too. But just take a moment, close your eyes, and think, what did I get out of that that's worth reminding myself of? Okay. So thank you for coming to this introduction, and hope to see you signing up. and hope to see you in the groups that we create. So thank you, and thank you here.